Hello everyone, and welcome to Module 4, the last one in this short series that we're doing on project fundamentals. As always, let me take you back to what we've covered so you can refresh in your mind a little bit. In the first module, we dealt with the definitions, important things to remember, what is a project, and out of that we dealt quite a lot with scoping for a project, and out of the scope last time we dealt with the work breakdown structure and how the work breakdown structure feeds into the scheduling and the resourcing and ultimately the budget that you are preparing. And all of that happens in the planning and in the execution phase. A big part of what we're focusing on now is the monitoring and control as part of that, not just the execution phase, it actually runs across all the phases of the project, and then the close out. And one thing that you should also keep an eye on is the risks associated with the project. So we'll deal a little bit with keeping an eye on those risks. In the project charter, in the beginning of the project, you already know that this is the objective, this is what you have to deliver on, and you've defined your scope, but you've also defined how would you know if what you have delivered is of the right quality and to the right standard. So your the criteria against which you evaluate the success of the project is actually defined, and it again goes back to time and the quality and the cost of the project. So that little triangle is not going away. It will always be there with you. So the monitoring and control is the biggest part of what the project manager does on the project. And all the monitoring and control remember the 10 knowledge areas? It means the project manager works across those 10 knowledge areas: stakeholder communication, procurement, resourcing, and it monitors each one of them to ensure that what we said we would deliver in that specific phase of the project actually gets delivered. Keeps an eye open, scans the horizon to be able to see, ooh, trouble's coming this way, better move out of the way like this. And all of that results in your project reporting is some of the key deliverables. Now remember, if you go back to the stakeholders, you report on a variety of things to different stakeholder groups. So a large part of your reporting is actually on progress. How are we faring in the project? Are we where we are supposed to be in the project? And there's a lovely analogy. If you compare a project to a trip that you are taking on an aeroplane, the whole trip is your project that you are doing. The project team is actually like the staff on a plane. The project manager is the pilot, and there's a specific route that is planned. But more to that route, we know how much fuel we have to use for every step of the journey. That is our budget. But we also know in that route we have to fly over certain markers. Those are our milestones to be able to make sure that we get to where we are supposed to be at the end of our journey. So the project reporting tracks the progress of the team, utilizing all the resources required to complete their tasks, making sure that we are moving towards an objective within the constraints of that triangle: scope, time, budget, and quality associated with it. So to be able to give decent progress reports and to gauge where are we tracking in our journey, we have to gather information from a variety of sources. Some of it sits in our project review meetings, meetings that we have with our different team members. Some of it are specific interviews that you conduct. Some of it is actually physically going to a site and doing an inspection to see if what we have built there is what is delivered and is on target and to the right quality. And some of it is desktop review, where you get certain documentation and you have to make sure that that progress is reflected in the documentation that you have received. So again, the size of the project and the duration of the project has a big impact in how complicated this monitoring and tracking part of what the project manager has to do is. Like in the airplane metaphor that I used, sometimes things go wrong. There might be a big thunderstorm and you have to go around something. So one of the key things that the project manager also have to do is to look at what goes wrong in which specific work package or with resources, and what is the corrective action that needs to be taken to ensure that we still arrive on time when we are supposed to. When we look at what things go wrong in the project, we have to ask ourselves a few questions. What caused this deviation from our plan? Was it something unforeseen? What impact does it have on the schedule and on the resources? What do we need to do to correct it with minimal impact and still staying in that triangle, still reaching our goal towards the end? We have to track a variety of things, not just progress, not just budget. We also have to track deliverables, we have to track quality, we have to do that through our project meetings, and different kind of meetings exist for different kind of stakeholder groups. If you run large projects, it's a very formal way of reporting back, and dashboards in terms of we are in this phase, these were the key deliverables that we were supposed to deliver on, and a lot of companies make use of a sort of red, amber, green in these milestones were achieved or not achieved, to give a glance for a exec committee or a sponsor to look at the project in one glance and be able to see what's on track, what's not on track. And again, it boils down to what are the risks associated with the project. The more complex the project, the more complex in general the reporting requirements. Different kind of reports exist, like I explained, project highlights, risk, plans going forward, things to watch out for, and the differentiation between risks and issues. Whilst we are tracking and monitoring and encountering things that don't exactly go according to plan, one of the key processes, tools to keep in mind is change control. So things will go wrong in projects. Sometimes think about a building site. We are building a lovely house for someone, and as we are laying the foundations, we encounter an enormous rock bed at the bottom, which prevents us from doing the foundations of the house as we intended to do it. Now that's typically something that we couldn't have foreseen. We did our tests, but we now have to find some kind of workaround, and that workaround is a change control. So there's a formal process by which we have to apply and say, if we include this thing or we do it differently, is it still in the scope of the project? What is the impact on time? What is the impact on cost? What is the impact in terms of the quality that we're delivering? But you have to think in terms of all of those different knowledge areas when you're thinking about change control, because change control might also have an impact on stakeholders. It might have an impact on procurement, on resources. So every change that comes up that forces us to deviate from our plan, we have to evaluate and ask ourselves, what can I do with this specific one in terms of the impact that it has on all of the knowledge areas in the project? So one of the key things, if you understand that things will go wrong in projects and things will happen that you didn't predict and plan for, is risk and risk management specifically. So there's a difference between risks and issues. And when you are defining risk, is more of an exercise that you can do upfront. It's something that hasn't happened yet, but because you understand the scope and you understand the work, you can also anticipate certain things that can go wrong and plan for those things. So in terms of the risk management process, one has to identify the different risks, and then you have to quantify risks. And quantification of risks typically looks at what would be the impact if this happened, and the likelihood. There are very, very sophisticated risk models, but if you understand that if something has a small impact when it happens, and it is a very small likelihood that it will happen, then it is a risk that is categorized as a lower type of risk. And then you make a call based on those risks to decide, do I accept this risk? Do I move around it? What's my mitigating plans as part of that risk? Another aspect about risk is also to understand where in the project phases your phases are that you have to watch out for most in terms of risk. And that's generally the last two phases of the project, because in the beginning of the project, you still have time to deal with issues and risks that pop up. But the closer you come to the deadline, and if that deadline is fixed in stone, the least time you have to fix it and make a plan. So back to the risk management process. Very important to identify them, quantify them, and then the next step is, what is the mitigating steps that you have to take to deal with each type of risk? So issues are slightly different from risk in the sense that they are things that you encounter and it's already happened. And one of the key artifacts, like you have a risk log, is you actually have an issue register or issue log where you document exactly what has happened. And it's important to say, is this being dealt with and by whom it is dealt with? And issues is one of those things, again, that you have to monitor and evaluate if we are going to be impacted in terms of our timelines, quality, cost, if this issue grows bigger and bigger and it's not dealt with. The last topic in Module 4 is project closure. And I think it's sometimes a phase in a project that's a bit neglected, because by that time we are either so tired of this project, and some projects can literally go on over years, and we are really tired of our teammates and the pressure and the constant pressure to deliver something. We just want to get this over and done with, but it's not as easy as that. There is the whole, in terms of the closure, there is the checklist of everything that you have to close out. Remember the examples that we gave earlier on in terms of the commissioning, what you have to hand over. Can you remember we did the solar panel type of example, and we explained the warranties, or the citrus farm example, and we said, okay, you have to hand over equipment, warranties for the equipment, operating instruction. All of those are now dealt with. And now at the end of what we've achieved, we look back and we say, okay, so how do we evaluate if this is what we delivered is actually what we set out to deliver? Think about the analogy of the airplane journey. Did we end up all contained, everybody still here and on board, and our plane intact in the place that we set out to land? And that is like looking back at the end of your project and going back to your business case and going back to your charter and asking yourself, did this temporary endeavor actually achieve the objective that it set out to achieve for the stakeholders involved? What is still outstanding? What remains undone? Because those things also need to be documented at the end of a project and made visible to say, our scope is completed, we've delivered this, but these are actually activities that will need attention in a different kind of format. Then you ask yourself, back to the triangle, were there any cost overruns? And why were there cost overruns? And do we know which activity cost more? Remember when we spoke about budget, we said for every single activity you need to be able to track what will it cost, what is the actual versus the budget. And then there's in the part of the post-project evaluation, there's a sort of knowledge, lessons learned, and typical type of question that you ask in there is, what did we learn out of this? What will we do in a different way? Why did things happen in the way that they happen? Is the methodology that we chose the right kind of methodology? And that's a team activity. And it's a great way to close something off for a team, is to be able to do that project post-mortem and say, okay, so how as a team have we grown and how can we do this better next time around? So we've spoken about the handover and the delivery of all the different things that you have to do. We've spoken about the project evaluation. And one of the other elements is the team disbandment. So imagine you've worked on that oil rig project and you've done this for years. This has been your family, your home, everything has been on this oil rig. And now here it is up and running and you actually have to disband that team. Contracts have to end. Contracts with team members, with suppliers, and there's sometimes a phased approach in which resources are off-boarded from a project in a very structured way. But there is some kind of closure that is required in terms of team closeout as well. And don't forget that. A great sense of loss sometimes goes around a team when you delivered something great and now that project is finished. One of the last deliverables for the project manager is the close-out report. And what all goes into that report. Again, what did you set out to do? The outputs, the financials, the risk and challenges. What did we learn out of this? Our evaluation. And what advice would you give to people that want to try this type of thing in future? So as I mentioned before, a big part of that project closure is the disbanding of the team. If performance reviews is at hand, that's the type of stuff that you do at that. The debriefing that I explained, outputs and outcomes, thanking the teams, the sponsor, quite an important one in terms of experience. Remember when we identified stakeholders in the beginning we said it's the project team, it's people in the business, and it is people outside of the business that's involved in this. So a mistake that we made in disbanding is we just do this with the team. You have to, in terms of your communication, talk to the rest of the organization and in their minds, close the project off for them as well. And similarly for stakeholders that lie outside of the company. Close out goes across all the levels. And as much as you started a project with a lot of fanfare, to close it out properly closes it out in people's head as a success or a failure. Did you achieve the objectives, or did this project fail to meet the objectives? And that is the end of Module 4.